Can we all just get along? It's time for our final segment where we find an area where there's bipartisan agreement. On this one, there's only one person who happens not to agree. The Pentagon will begin processing transgendered applications to the military starting on January 1st. Transgender military service members are challenging the president's memorandum directing the Secretary of Defense to bar transgendered Americans from military service. The challengers have so far been successful in blocking the president's policies while the lawsuits play out in court. Their latest victory came Monday when it was ruled that the government would not be irrevocably injured if the January 1st deadline remained in place as the lawsuits continue, which basically means that transgender individuals be allowed to serve in our military moving forward until the courts make their final ruling. So far, we have about anywhere from 2,500 to 7,000 trans people serving in our military. Now, let me be very clear. Here is where there's bipartisan agreement. Trans rights are human rights, period. There is no equivocation, and there should be no debate on this subject. Sadly, there is. And that debate comes from those individuals that are a stick in the mud. Better yet, they're a stick in concrete. And they choose to use their hate, their demagoguery, and they use selected scriptures from the Bible to discriminate and hate against things they choose not to take the time to understand. One of those individuals happens to be the leader of the free world and the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. In a tweet, here is what he said. This was the first tweet that he made on trans rights in the military. After consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and the disruption that transgenders in the military would entail. Thank you. Sadly, this tweet is intellectually dishonest. The surgery that he's talking about, or gender reassignment surgery, is actually not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. If you look at all the government agencies in the United States government, the one where there is the most fraud, waste, and abuse is our Defense Department. We have covered this department on this show ad nauseum. We could tell you about air carriers or planes that have never been flown because the generals don't want them. We could talk to you about supply surpluses that have never been used because a member of Congress that factory happens to be in their district and they want to keep those workers employed, so the military must purchase this good or service even though they choose not to use it. The gender reassignment surgery is a very, 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 very small percentage of the U.S. Defense Department budget. And the fact that the president would make this such a big issue, and the fact that the president would use this almost zero number to ban an entire group of people from the military speaks to his ignorance, his lack of understanding, and his downright hate for the LGBTQ community. Remember, candidate Trump said, "I will be the greatest ally to the LGBTQ community." Well, Mr. President, clearly your words don't match up with your actions. And on top of that, I'm not really sure which generals you consulted, because the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said he thinks that transgendered people serve with honor. And the Commandant for the Coast Guard said he will not break the faith and he will not turn his back on the transgendered folks that serve in his division. You can't say that you are for the LGBTQ community, Mr. President, if you attack them vehemently. In addition to that, shortly after President Trump announced his directive Defense Secretary James Mattis said he would work with a panel of experts to recommend how the military should put the administrator's trans guidance into effect. Once the panel concluded, Mattis would provide the president with advice on how to implement his policy directive. Now, the new directive is expected to come out in March, but I doubt that directive will matter at all because the courts will likely rule in favor of trans people, because any judge who has common sense will tell you that trans rights are human rights, and a trans person can do the same thing that a regular person can do, because trans people are regular people. Hello? It all makes sense. Sadly, the president doesn't get it. America, this is a situation where we can all get along. This is a situation where we can all agree. This is an issue that should connect every American. Why? Because we have made so much progress as a country. We have codified the ideal that gay and lesbian should have the right to marry. We have codified the ideal in many states that gays and lesbians should be able to adopt. We have codified the ideal that people should be able to go to work and should be able to go to play without discrimination. And now it is time for us to take this a step further. We have already allowed gays and lesbians to serve in our military, and now it is time for us to allow transgendered individuals to serve in our military as well. And to be frank, while I've never engaged in military service, I'll tell you this: I'd rather serve with a trans person than to serve with a coward like our president. Remember, our president dodged the draft. These 2,500 to 7,000 individuals who are trans that serve our country, they do it bravely and they do it voluntarily. Something our president and his family has never done. Neither him nor his kids have served in our armed services, and nor do they plan to. These individuals are brave, they're bold, and they deserve our respect, they deserve our admiration, and more so than anything else, they deserve to do their jobs without discrimination and without the threat of violence being done to them. And when the president loosey-goosely, if that's a word, releases tweets like banning them from the military, he creates a world where they can be discriminated against. The military is one of the few organizations that has made leaps and bounds to end discrimination, right? When you think about it. The military was one of the first places in our country where they ended racial discrimination. And then, when it came down to sexual assault, the military was the first one to be exposed, and they were the first one to really work hard to fix the problem. The military was the first one to integrate transgender people into service, and the military should be the example. So let's not follow President Trump's lead, and let's make the military more discriminatory. Let's make the military a place where everybody's welcome. Because if we are truly going to be the city upon a hill that that Winthrop wanted us to be, then we've got to accept everybody. That's what makes us strong. That's what shows our overwhelming force. And that's what's going to make victory possible. Nothing shows American strength than our transgender troops going abroad and beating the enemy back in places that beat transgendered people, or in places where it's illegal to be transgendered, or in places where being transgendered is the death penalty. That is how we show American strength, and that is how we defeat the enemy, both morally and physically.